I once heard someone say that if WordPress is like Legos, then Drupal is the plastic. And when comparing the difference between WordPress and Drupal, I think this is an excellent analogy to really understand the difference between WordPress and Drupal. Now, to a layman's eye, I think WordPress and Drupal are basically the same thing, and there's actually a lot of similarities to them. But once you get down under the hood, you can really start to see where they differentiate. And I'm going to take you through some of the strengths and weaknesses of both WordPress and Drupal, why you might choose one over the other, and kind of help guide your decision so you can ultimately pick the one that's going to work best for you right now and then for the future too. Anything that we pick, we want to make sure it's suitable for our needs. It's going to scale with us, so as we grow, the system can grow with us, and that it's maintainable because you don't want to be taking extra time or having a hard time trying to maintain it because you want to focus your resources on the things that matter most. So I've built a lot of WordPress sites, a lot of Drupal sites, and I have a very keen eye for understanding the differences and the pros and cons and which one to choose for which scenario. And I'm going to do my best to articulate that to you so you can also share that knowledge. Let's start by talking about the similarities because like I said, they're very similar. One, that the backend is written in PHP, which is a programming language. Two, they are both open source, meaning that the code itself is free to look at and modify and download to your server, so it's free to use. Open source is a really excellent model for website content management systems because they allow an entire community of people to contribute to it, and it improves much faster than if a single entity or company were to maintain it. They're both pretty old. They've been on the market since the very early 2000s. I think Drupal was started in like 1999 in a dorm room, but they've both been around for a long time and have matured and developed with the needs of the market. They both use the same database natively on the back end, which is MySQL or MariaDB. They both require the same servers as well. So when you break it down, a lot of them use a Linux server with Apache on there or Nginx. Either way, they both use the same server architectures. So you know the structure of it, the code, the database, they're very similar going from one to the next, if not the same. They're both great for managing content, and one Drupal's better at managing content, but they're both still content management systems, and we'll break down the differences here in a bit. And they're each extendable with plugins. WordPress calls them plugins, Drupal calls them modules, but either way, they're just additional software that you download, install, and they'll extend the functionality of the platform. And both of them have a huge library of tutorials, online resources, and troubleshooting. There's so much stuff in Stack Overflow or just documentation online that there's really no difference between them as far as how many resources are available. And lastly, because you are downloading that open source software on your server, it does require your maintenance to keep it up to date. Make sure you keep WordPress or Drupal core up to date, and then all the plugins and modules as well. And then you have to kind of test through that to make sure that it works with your full setup. So those are the main similarities between the platforms. Again, they're very, very similar, but these differences will be large enough that it makes sense to go with one or the other platform depending on your needs. Now, generally speaking, Drupal is the superior platform. Drupal can do everything that WordPress can do and more, and it can do it better. Now, there are some instances, though, where to accomplish those same things on Drupal, it's going to take you a lot more work to do it on Drupal than if you were to do it on WordPress. And so if you only need certain things done, WordPress might be your better bet. But Drupal has more capabilities, and so let's talk about those more. Let's start by talking about WordPress. WordPress makes a lot of assumptions about the way your website is going to be. And so this is where that analogy of Legos come into play, where it assumes the molding of the plastic, right? You have the Legos. And while you can change things in WordPress, it's a little bit more rigid and it's not necessarily streamlined for what you want to do. And so you might take a performance hit. It might be harder to maintain or scale. And so those are some things to consider. So WordPress is good at managing basic types of content. So out of the box, you get two main content types, which are posts and pages. There's also some other stuff like media and whatnot, but we'll just stick with posts and pages. And so a page is just like for one-off pages on the website. You want to create a home page, a contact us page, and stuff like that, and be able to design it out. And then the other type is posts. and posts are mainly for blogs or articles and stuff like that. Both of these types of content are very important to look at. And so first of all, let's look at pages. Pages are actually easier to use in WordPress because they have a designer that you can use with it. Now, WordPress doesn't come with a designer. You have to download like Elementor or WordPress Bakery or something like that. But at the end of the day, you can use these tools that make it super easy to lay out your content. You can have 2 different regions and then set background colors and styles and a bunch of different CSS without ever having to write CSS or HTML. And so there's a lot of designers out there that are very good at designing, but if you don't know HTML or CSS, you can't implement the designs and you would have to pass it off to a developer. But WordPress has these tools that make it very easy to design out web pages, and they're also very flexible tools. And then I want to touch on posts too. Posts are a type of managed data. And so if you think about blogs, you always have a title, a body, a featured image, and that doesn't change from post to post. All you do is you write your body, you write the title, you come up with an image, and you don't have to completely design out a blog every time you create it, right? You just fill out the form of here's my title, here's my body, here's my image, and then it displays it in a template. And so the managed data concept has a bunch of different data, all the different blogs, but one template. And so you use this one template to design out your blogs, and then any blog that is rendered in there will just dynamically swap out the title, the body, and the featured image. Now, those are the 2 assumptions that WordPress has for content, is that you're going to have pages and posts. But what happens if you have team members, or if you have some other type of content you need to manage? Maybe they're job listings. There's a bunch of different items out there that you need a certain set of fields for. If they're job listings, you have requirements, you have salary, you have start date, location, all this different stuff. And you don't want to have to design out a completely new page every time you have a job listing. You want to create a template once, fill out a form for each job listing, and for it to automatically get rendered out. WordPress doesn't have that capability built in, and while you can download other plugins that will let you do this, like pods or advanced custom fields tied with a custom post type UI plugin, then you can achieve this. But the problem is WordPress itself isn't really built to handle all these different data types. And as a result, the way it's stored on the back end is pretty inefficient and not very scalable. It's all just stored in one spot or one table in the database. And so it's, you can still extend it a bit, but it's not its strong piece, okay? And we'll get into more of where Drupal excels, and specifically with custom content types, because that's a huge difference. But I want to touch on a couple more points with WordPress. Another area that WordPress excels in is the plugins. Now, WordPress has a massive library of plugins, which is just additional, apps or software modules you can add that will give your site additional functionality. The plugins on WordPress are pretty plug and play. They take very little configuration, and they're just pretty much ready to go. And that's kind of both a pro and a con. And so it's a pro because, they're ready to go. It takes less time, but it's a con because the plugins don't integrate across the system as well as you might hope for in some cases. They're kind of siloed off, and they provide this one area of functionality. And so if we go back to the Lego analogy, if we need a roof for the house, we have that Lego roof we plop right on. But in Drupal, you kind of have to meld that roof to fit. But as a result, it's going to be much more integrated with the system, a lot more contact points with the system, and so you'll be able to interact with it in other places of your application. One more note on WordPress plugins is that a lot of times you will find that the base plugin will be free, but then some pro features or advanced features will cost extra money. Something to be aware of. I want to touch on one bigger thing within WordPress, and that's the life cycle of the entire software. And it might be coming to an end here. Now, WordPress, if you already manage a site, know that there's a bunch of updates that you have to apply to plugins and core and keep it up to date as the maintainers or the developers keep it up to date. You got to download that stuff. But there's only so many places those updates can take the system before the entire foundation needs to get rewritten. And WordPress is at that point. The problem is part of WordPress's popularity comes from the fact that, well, one, it's very easy to use, it's beginner friendly, but two, it has a massive library of plugins. Drupal does too, but the WordPress plugins are a little bit more, like I was talking about before, pre-configured, ready to go for exactly how you want it. Now, if WordPress were to rewrite the entire structure, the foundation of WordPress, then all of the plugins would become incompatible. And so all of these third-party developers would need to rewrite their plugins in order to be compatible with the newest version. A lot of times people write plugins 2, 3 years down the line. They're not really maintaining that plugin anymore, or if they are, it's very basic. They've moved on, they don't have time for it anymore. And so there's going to be a lot of plugins that don't get updated, which will reduce the total library of plugins available for this new version of WordPress if it were to come out. I think that WordPress is getting to the end of its life cycle, or it already has gotten there, and they're at a tough spot with deciding how to rewrite it or when they're going to rewrite it. There might already be something in motion. I haven't really followed that, but I know that if you were to build it on the existing WordPress today, it is a bit outdated. Even though they're keeping it up to date, there's only so much they can do. Off the top of my head, there's a few things that I would say are the biggest things that WordPress needs to change when they update the platform. One of them is to change it from functional programming to object-oriented programming. Essentially, it's a type of structure of code, and if you go OOP or object-oriented, it's way more flexible, maintainable, extendable. And it'll also so-called future-proof it because it's much easier to take out individual pieces and replace them in object-oriented programming as it is to functional coding. And so that's a really big thing they need to look out for. Another area is to improve the caching system. And so with all this content in WordPress, when you update content, it doesn't always update on the front end of the website. You might see out of date or stale content, and that's because WordPress's caching system isn't intelligent. They need to implement something that keeps track of where each item is cached, and then when each item is updated to go and clear those caches. The third item is to implement some sort of event system instead of their action system. It's another programming thing that allows other pieces of the application to react when something else happens, and it's a more modernized way of doing it. There are plenty of other ways that WordPress should improve itself, but those I think are some of the biggest ways that require a foundational change. All right, let's talk about Drupal. Drupal is an amazing platform. It is my favorite for the right project. I don't just use it willy-nilly, but if I have the right project for it, it's definitely going to be my go-to. If it's the wrong project for it, I'm going to be spending too much time focusing on things that could have been done much faster if I used a different platform and come up with a pretty similar result. But let's talk about some of the strengths of Drupal. Drupal has a built-in extendable content management system. So he talked about WordPress having posts and pages. Drupal has those pre-configured out of the box to kind of show you this is what you can do. But you just go in their menu and say add content type. Let's call it team members, and then define the fields you want team members to have. So position, title, and picture. And then all you do is you start creating that content, and now you have a separate piece of type of content you can manage. And the Drupal architecture is built to thrive off of content types. The way the database is structured, the way the caching system is structured, the way the flexibility is structured. It's just all really, really great at handling these different types of content types. Additionally, you can make them very relatable to each other. So, if you have an author of blogs and you also have the team member section, and you want to show all of the blogs a team member has written, you can kind of relate the blogs to the team member and display them all that way. There's much more complex relations you can make across the content, which makes your website automatically stay up to date when you change things. And so that's another big area that it excels in. Now, one of the areas I talked about WordPress being great in was having a user interface to design out web pages. Drupal doesn't have that. They have places that you can lay out content, so you can say, I want to show blog posts right here, team members right here, show them on these pages but not these pages. Stuff like that is built into Drupal, but the ability to say I want to set a background to this section or create a multi-column layout or change colors and stuff like that isn't in Drupal. A lot of that design work has to fall into your your CSS files are actually coded out files, your templates and stuff like that. Now, Drupal does have a much better templating system than WordPress. And so when it comes to creating these dynamic content types and stuff like that, the theming layer of Drupal is very, very powerful. And if you do have a lot of managed content, Drupal is just going to be the best for creating your templates, creating your content. It just takes a little bit more work because you have to put the design in code. But at the end of the day, you can still output the same thing as you could in WordPress. It just might take a little bit more. Drupal also has a huge library of modules. Drupal doesn't really have this like commercialized modules where you have to pay for them. It would be pretty rare to come across that. The modules are a little bit more flexible. Everything in Drupal is very abstract. And so when it's more abstract, it doesn't make assumptions about what you're doing. And so it takes a little bit more work to get it where you want it to be. But as a result, it can get there. And it also can get there and still be extremely performant and very scalable and maintainable and things like that. Versus WordPress, if you try to get it there, you can, but the system's really not meant for that. Another analogy I heard of is if WordPress is a car, then Drupal is a vehicle. It can be a rocket ship, it could be a truck, it could be a boat, it's just some sort of vehicle. So it just kind of goes to show you can really take it in a lot of different directions. Now, we talked on WordPress about the life cycle of the software. Drupal was also in that state up until Drupal 7, or including Drupal 7. It was not in that most modernized state. And so as a result, I think around 2016, Drupal went through a very long rewrite that took an entire community, and Drupal's community is really big. They're very dedicated, and you get much better output from the Drupal community. But it took all of them to write a Drupal 8. Took many years, but as a result, we're actually in Drupal 9 now. The system is much more modernized. It's much more upgradable for the future. So from going to Drupal 8 to Drupal 9 is a very clean path forward versus when they went from 7 to 8, you had to completely rebuild your system and migrate content over. But now going forward, the system, because it is that object-oriented programming, it's very easy to take out pieces and put other pieces in and keep adapting the software. And so Drupal went through that. The modules got updated. I mean, there's very rarely a module I come across that only has a Drupal 7 version that doesn't have a Drupal 8 or above version. And so the community did it, and as a result, they're much more future-proof where it is right now. I want to touch on performance too. Drupal's caching system, which makes your website faster, is really strong. It's very smart, and it's also very performant. Any Drupal site I build will be much faster than any WordPress website I build. There's just something about the foundation that you can't really make up for on a WordPress site. And then the last topic I want to touch on is difficulty. And so this is why WordPress is so popular, is because it's easy to use. Somebody with no experience can get started and have a website going in like a day maybe. But Drupal takes a long time to learn. I've been doing it for 8 years, and there's still things I learn. Now, given the things I learn is on the programmatic side, so it's learning about how to extend certain foundational pieces of the software using code. But the point is, I've been doing this for a long time and a lot of time during each of those years, and there's still more stuff to learn. Versus WordPress, you can get up and going pretty quickly and building websites. Okay, so I've talked a lot about the pros and cons of each one, the similarities. I want to touch on a couple of points that might help you choose which platform is best for your needs. I hope that a lot of these tips have kind of already made you go oh yeah, this is the right platform for me, or oh, I was choosing the wrong platform. But I'll talk about some of the projects I might get and why I would choose one over the other. And so if I have a website and it doesn't have a lot of content management needs, all it has is a blog, maybe it has team members, but it's really just there so you can create a homepage, a contact us page, and stuff like that. I would recommend using WordPress because making design changes is much easier, and the benefits you're going to get from Drupal are usually just not worth that time difference. And especially after you build the website and you have to make new pages, it could just take a lot longer on Drupal. Now, if there are content management needs where you want a very scalable content management system, create all these custom content types, then Drupal is going to be the better platform for you. Now, it used to just be WordPress or Drupal, And I really try to take WordPress out of the mix because of the other things I was saying, where it's kind of at the end of the life cycle. Some of the other points I didn't touch on was that it can be overkill for creating just like a brochure website or one that has a homepage about us page. And so I've introduced DUDA to the mix, which DUDA is super, super strong at creating these brochure websites. You know, you just want to create pages, design them out, and they actually have some content management capabilities too. They're pretty limited, but they're actually built-in extendable content management system, and WordPress doesn't even have that. DUDA is also completely managed, so the two we just compared, WordPress and Drupal, are open source. DUDA is managed; it sits on their servers, so we don't have to update plugins and do all this overhead work that just takes a lot of time to maintain a website. And so I've really tried to cut WordPress out. There are still instances where Drupal is a little bit too much to use, but DUDA is not enough. And so I will use WordPress still. A good example might be a real estate website that wants to integrate with an MLS. You can do that on DUDA and you can do that on Drupal for sure, but WordPress is just like got that balance between being able to extend to an MLS while also being able to design out pages very easily. And so it still does have a bit of a niche in the market. If you look at all content management systems, WordPress has 45%-ish market share. So like out of all CMSs on the internet, 45% of them are going to be WordPress. Drupal has around 2%. And I don't recall DUDA, but I think they're in the top 10 right now. They're a bit new, but they're going to, I think, surpass WordPress as time goes on, or at least surpass the choice of which one you're going to make now. Because there's so many WordPress websites out there, it'll take a really long time for it to beat it. But as far as new websites, I think DUDA is going to pass up WordPress as soon as more people just get to know that it's a thing. And so if you're interested in DUDA, you can check out my channel. I do a lot of tutorials and pros, cons, stuff like that, so you can get to know the platform before using it. Well, guys, I think that's everything, or at least the biggest points I wanted to touch on. You know, I can talk about Drupal, WordPress all day. There's a lot of differences, but I hope that this has helped you figure out which one. If you haven't figured out, feel free to reach out and you can kind of tell me what you have going on, and I can help you steer you in the right direction. Anyways, guys, I appreciate you guys watching until the end. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys in the next one.